The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her black dress one final time. She had driven 3 hours from Los Angeles to attend her best friend Jessica's wedding to Marine Lieutenant David Chen. The ceremony was being held at the base chapel, a small but dignified building that had witnessed countless unions between service members and their loved ones. Sarah felt nervous, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Perhaps it was because she hadn't been on a military base since her father's funeral 5 years ago. The familiar sounds of distant training exercises and the sight of uniformed Marines walking with purpose brought back memories she had tried to bury. Her father, Sergeant Major Robert Mitchell, had been her hero until the day an IED in Afghanistan took him away from her forever. As she walked toward the chapel, her heels clicking against the concrete pathway, Sarah unconsciously touched the spot on her left shoulder blade where her tattoo rested beneath the fabric of her dress. The intricate design had been her way of honoring her father's memory, though she rarely showed it to anyone. It depicted a fierce eagle with outstretched wings, clutching a banner that bore her father's military coordinates from his final mission, along with his favorite motto, Semper Fi, until we meet again. The chapel was already filling with guests when Sarah arrived. She recognized some of Jessica's college friends and family members, but most of the attendees were Marines in their dress blue uniforms. The sight of so many service members in formal attire created an atmosphere of respect and honor that made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion. She found her assigned seat in the third row and settled in, trying to focus on the happy occasion rather than her own complicated feelings about military life. Jessica had always been the optimist between them, the one who saw the good in every situation. When she met David at a charity event 2 years ago, she had fallen head over heels for the quiet, thoughtful Marine who spoke passionately about serving his country. The chapel grew quiet as the ceremony was about to begin. Sarah watched as the groomsmen took their positions at the altar, all impressive in their military bearing. The officiant, a chaplain with kind eyes and graying temples, began speaking about the sacred bond of marriage and the special challenges faced by military families. Then the music began, and Jessica appeared at the back of the chapel in her flowing white gown, looking radiant as she walked down the aisle arm in arm with her father. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, remembering how her own father would never get the chance to walk her down an aisle. She pushed the thought away, determined to focus on her friend's happiness. The ceremony proceeded beautifully, with David and Jessica exchanging heartfelt vows that spoke of love, commitment, and the strength to endure separations that military life would inevitably bring. When they kissed as husband and wife, the entire chapel erupted in applause and cheers from their fellow Marines. As the newlyweds processed back down the aisle, Sarah stood with the rest of the congregation, clapping enthusiastically. She was genuinely happy for her friend, but she also felt a deep longing for the kind of love and stability that Jessica had found. At 28, Sarah had had several relationships, but none that had led to anything lasting. Her work as a graphic designer kept her busy, and she often told herself she was too independent to settle down. The reception was being held in the base's Officers Club, an elegant venue with large windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Sarah made her way there along with the other guests, chatting politely with Jessica's cousins and making small talk about the beautiful ceremony. She was looking forward to celebrating with her friend and maybe even meeting some interesting people. The cocktail hour was in full swing when Sarah arrived at the club. Marines in their dress uniforms mingled with civilian guests, creating a festive atmosphere. She grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found Jessica, who was glowing with happiness as she received congratulations from well-wishers. "Sarah!" Jessica exclaimed, pulling her into a warm hug. "I'm so glad you could make it. You look absolutely beautiful in that dress." "Not nearly as beautiful as the bride," Sarah replied, squeezing her friend tight. The ceremony was perfect, Jess. I may have cried a little. Only a little? Jessica laughed. I was sobbing through my vows. I'm surprised David could understand a word I was saying. They chatted for a few more minutes before Jessica was swept away by other guests wanting to congratulate her. Sarah found herself standing alone near the bar, observing the crowd and feeling slightly out of place among all the military personnel. She was used to creative industry events where people wore quirky outfits and discussed art and design trends. This was a different world entirely. She was considering stepping outside for some fresh air when she noticed him across the room. He was tall, probably in his early 30s, with dark hair neatly trimmed in a military cut and shoulders that filled out his dress blue uniform impressively. He carried himself with the confident bearing that seemed to come naturally to career Marines, but there was something else about him that caught her attention. While other officers were engaged in animated conversations, he stood quietly observing the room with an intensity that made Sarah curious. As if sensing her gaze, he looked directly at her across the crowded room. Their eyes met for a moment, and Sarah felt an unexpected jolt of attraction. He had striking green eyes and a face that was both ruggedly handsome and surprisingly gentle. She looked away quickly, feeling her cheeks warm with embarrassment at being caught staring. When she glanced back a moment later, he was walking in her direction. Sarah's heart began to beat faster, and she took a sip of her champagne to calm her nerves. She wasn't usually shy around men, but something about this Marine's presence was making her feel uncharacteristically flustered. "Excuse me," he said as he approached, his voice deep and measured. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Captain Marcus Rodriguez." He extended his hand, and Sarah shook it, noticing the strength and warmth of his grip. "Sarah Mitchell. I'm a friend of the bride." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah. Are you enjoying the reception?" "Very much. It's a beautiful venue, and Jessica looks so happy." Sarah found herself relaxing slightly as they talked. Despite his imposing presence, Marcus had an easy way about him that put her at ease. "Jessica is a wonderful person," Marcus agreed. "David is lucky to have found her. They complement each other well." "Do you work with David?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about this intriguing man. "We serve in the same battalion. I've known David for about 3 years now. He's one of the finest officers I've had the privilege to serve with." They continued chatting about the wedding, the base, and Sarah's drive down from Los Angeles. Marcus was an engaging conversationalist, asking thoughtful questions and listening attentively to her answers. Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying his company, something she hadn't experienced with a man in quite some time. "Would you like to step outside for a moment?" Marcus suggested as the noise level in the club increased. "There's a terrace with a beautiful view of the ocean." Sarah nodded, and they made their way through the French doors onto a stone terrace overlooking the Pacific. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, its surface sparkling in the fading light. "This is incredible," Sarah said, leaning against the terrace railing. "I can see why people love living here." "It never gets old," Marcus replied, standing beside her. "I've been stationed here for 2 years, and I still find myself stopping to appreciate views like this." They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the waves roll onto the shore below. Sarah felt more relaxed than she had all day, and she found herself genuinely attracted to this thoughtful Marine who seemed so different from the stereotypes she had carried about military men. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Marcus said suddenly, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Of course," she replied, turning to face him. "That dress is beautiful on you, but I couldn't help noticing. Do you have a tattoo on your shoulder blade?" Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The dress had a low-cut back, and she realized that the top edge of her tattoo might be visible. She hadn't thought about it when she chose the outfit. and now she felt exposed and vulnerable. Yes, I do, she admitted quietly. Marcus's expression had changed subtly, and Sarah noticed that his relaxed demeanor had been replaced by something more intense, almost urgent. "Would it be too forward of me to ask what it depicts?" he asked carefully. Sarah hesitated. She rarely discussed her tattoo with strangers, especially the deeply personal meaning behind it. But something in Marcus's tone suggested this wasn't idle curiosity. "It's an eagle," she said slowly, "with some coordinates and a phrase." Marcus went completely still, his green eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made Sarah's pulse quicken. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What phrase?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the warm evening air. "Semper Fi, until we meet again." The effect of her words on Marcus was immediate and dramatic. His face went pale and his body became rigid as if he had been struck by lightning. His hands gripped the terrace railing so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "The coordinates," he said urgently, his voice strained. "What are the coordinates?" Sarah's mind was reeling. Why was this man reacting so strongly to her tattoo? How could he possibly know about something so personal and private? "I don't understand," she said, taking a step back. "Why are you asking about this?" Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them again, they were filled with an emotion Sarah couldn't identify. Pain, perhaps, or recognition, or both. "Please," he said quietly. "The coordinates. I need to know." Sarah felt her heart pounding as she realized that somehow, impossibly, this stranger might be connected to her father's story. Her voice shook as she recited the numbers that had been burned into her memory. 32.5431 north, 69.3479 east. Marcus's reaction was swift and devastating. He stumbled backward as if he had been physically struck, his face draining of all color. His breathing became rapid and shallow, and for a moment Sarah thought he might collapse. "Dear God," he whispered, staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. "You're Bobby Mitchell's daughter?" The world seemed to stop spinning as Sarah stared at Marcus in shock. No one had called her father Bobby in years. Only his closest military friends had used that nickname, and hearing it spoken by this stranger on a beautiful terrace overlooking the Pacific Ocean felt like a punch to her chest. "How do you know my father?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of waves crashing below. Marcus ran his hand through his dark hair, his composure completely shattered. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, and perhaps, in a way, he had. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Sergeant Major Mitchell saved my life," he said simply, "and the lives of my entire squad." Sarah felt her knees go weak. She gripped the terrace railing for support as memories she had tried to suppress came flooding back. She remembered the phone call that had changed everything, the formal notification that her father had been killed in action while protecting other Marines during a Taliban ambush in Afghanistan. "You were there?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You were there when he—" "Yes," Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "I was a second lieutenant then, fresh out of Quantico and leading my first patrol in Helmand Province. Your father wasn't supposed to be with us that day, but he volunteered to provide additional support because intelligence suggested increased enemy activity in the area." Marcus paused, struggling with emotions that were clearly still raw after all these years. Sarah waited, knowing instinctively that this was a story he had probably never told in full to anyone outside of official debriefings. "We were moving through a valley when the Taliban hit us from 3 sides, Marcus continued. "It was a coordinated ambush, and we walked right into it. The enemy fire was so intense that we couldn't move without exposing ourselves. We were pinned down, and our radio operator had been hit. We couldn't call for extraction or air support." Sarah closed her eyes, trying not to imagine her father in that terrible situation. She had read the official reports, but hearing it from someone who had been there made it devastatingly real. "Your father saw what was happening," Marcus went on. "He could have stayed in cover, waited for backup to arrive. Instead, he made a decision that saved all of our lives. He created a diversion by drawing enemy fire away from our position, giving us the opportunity to reach higher ground and establish a defensive perimeter." "But it cost him his life," Sarah said quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus nodded, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. He knew the risk he was taking. But he also knew that without his intervention, we would all be dead. 8 Marines came home because of your father's sacrifice. 8 men got to see their families again because Bobby Mitchell chose to put our lives above his own. The weight of this revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. For 5 years, she had struggled with anger and resentment about her father's death. She understood that he had died serving his country, but she had always felt that it was senseless, that his death hadn't really mattered in the grand scheme of the war. Learning that he had deliberately sacrificed himself to save other Marines gave his death a meaning that was both heartbreaking and somehow comforting. "I've carried the guilt of his sacrifice for 5 years," Marcus admitted. "Every promotion, every achievement, every day I've been alive since then has been because of what your father did. I've wondered countless times about his family, about whether he had children who would grow up without knowing what an extraordinary man their father was." Sarah wiped her tears with the back of her hand, trying to process everything she was hearing. "You felt guilty? Why would you feel guilty? You didn't ask him to sacrifice himself." "Because I was the squad leader," Marcus replied. "It was my job to get everyone home safely, and I failed. Your father had to step in and fix my mistake with his life." "That's not true," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. "From everything I've learned about my father, he would have made that same choice regardless of who was leading the squad. He believed in protecting his fellow Marines above everything else. That wasn't your failure, Captain Rodriguez. That was his calling." Marcus looked at her with something that might have been gratitude mixed with amazement. "You have his strength," he said softly, "and his wisdom." They stood in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. The sun had nearly set, and the reception inside was growing louder as the celebration continued, but neither Sarah nor Marcus seemed to notice the world around them. They were both grappling with the profound connection that fate had revealed between them. "Can you tell me more about him?" Sarah asked eventually. "About what he was like over there? I only knew him as my father, and he never talked about his military service when he came home on leave." Marcus's expression softened, and for the first time since their conversation began, he smiled slightly. "Your father was legendary among the enlisted Marines. They called him Steady Mitchell, because no matter how chaotic a situation became, he never lost his cool. He had this way of calming everyone around him just by being present." "That sounds like Dad," Sarah said, managing a small smile of her own. "He was like that at home too. Mom and I could be having a complete meltdown about something, and he would just listen calmly until we figured out the solution ourselves. He talked about you constantly," Marcus continued. "He carried pictures of you in his helmet, and during downtime, he would show them to anyone who would look. He was so proud of your artistic talents. He told us you were going to be a famous designer someday." Sarah felt fresh tears welling up. Her father had always supported her creative pursuits, even when other family members suggested she choose a more practical career path. Knowing that he had bragged about her to his fellow Marines meant more to her than she could express. "He was worried about missing your college graduation," Marcus added. "He had already put in for leave so he could fly back to watch you walk across that stage." "He never made it," Sarah whispered. "He was killed 3 weeks before graduation." "I know," Marcus said gently. He asked me to promise him something the night before that final patrol. Sarah looked at him sharply. What kind of promise? Marcus hesitated, clearly struggling with whether to share something that had remained private for so long. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would find a way to tell his daughter that her old man's last thoughts were of how proud he was of the woman she was becoming. The emotion in Marcus's voice was unmistakable, and Sarah realized that this promise had been weighing on him for years. He had probably never expected to have the opportunity to fulfill it, and certainly not under circumstances as unexpected as these. He said that all the time, Sarah managed through her tears. Even when I was a teenager and making questionable choices, he would tell me he was proud of the woman I was becoming. He meant every word, Marcus assured her. Your father was the most honest man I've ever known. He didn't say anything he didn't mean completely. As they continued talking, Sarah began to see Marcus not just as the composed Marine captain she had met an hour earlier, but as a young lieutenant who had been forever changed by her father's sacrifice. She could see the weight he carried, the responsibility he felt to honor her father's memory through his own service and conduct. What happened to the other Marines in your squad? Sarah asked. The ones my father saved? All 8 of us survived and made it home, Marcus replied. 4 of them are still in the Corps. 2 became teachers after they got out. One started his own construction business, and another became a paramedic. Every single one of them has built a life that honors your father's sacrifice. Do you stay in touch with them? We meet every year on the anniversary of that patrol, Marcus explained. We call it Bobby's Day. We share stories about what we've accomplished in the past year and make sure we're all living lives that justify the second chance your father gave us. Sarah was stunned by this revelation. The idea that 8 men gathered annually to honor her father's memory touched her deeply. She had felt so alone in her grief, believing that few people outside her family truly understood what her father had meant to the world. I would love to meet them someday, she said softly. I know they would be honored to meet you, Marcus replied. We've all wondered about Bobby's family over the years. We knew he had a daughter, but we never knew how to reach out without reopening painful wounds. Meeting you tonight doesn't reopen wounds, Sarah said with certainty. It helps heal them. For 5 years, I've struggled to understand why my father had to die. Learning that his death saved 8 good men gives it a meaning I never had before. Marcus studied her face intently. You really mean that? Completely, Sarah replied. My father lived his life serving others. Knowing that his final act of service saved lives rather than just ending his own helps me find peace with his loss. As if drawn by some invisible force, they moved closer together on the terrace. The connection between them had evolved from the shock of recognition into something deeper and more complex. They were bound together by tragedy, but also by the strength and love of a man who had shaped both of their lives in profound ways. Sarah, Marcus said quietly, I need you to know that meeting you tonight feels like the answer to a prayer I didn't know I was praying. I've carried your father's memory with me every day for 5 years, but I never imagined I would have the chance to honor that memory by getting to know the daughter he loved so much. Before Sarah could respond, they heard the sound of the French doors opening behind them. Jessica appeared on the terrace, her wedding dress rustling softly as she approached. There you are, she exclaimed, looking relieved. I've been searching everywhere for you, Sarah. The photographer wants to take some pictures with the college friends before it gets too dark. Sarah and Marcus stepped apart, both suddenly aware of how intimately they had been standing together. Jessica looked between them with curiosity, clearly sensing that something significant had occurred. I'm sorry to interrupt, Jessica said more quietly. I can have the photographer wait if you need more time. No, it's fine, Sarah replied, trying to collect herself. Captain Rodriguez was just telling me about his service with David. Jessica smiled at Marcus. Thank you for keeping Sarah company, Marcus. I worried she might feel out of place surrounded by so many Marines. It was my pleasure, Marcus said formally, though his eyes remained fixed on Sarah. Sarah is excellent company. As they prepared to return to the reception, Marcus gently touched Sarah's arm. Would it be possible for me to call you sometime? I would very much like to continue our conversation. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. The attraction she had felt toward this handsome Marine had only deepened as she learned about his connection to her father. But she also recognized that their relationship, whatever it might become, would be forever intertwined with grief and memory. I would like that very much, she said, reaching into her small evening bag for a business card. Marcus took the card carefully, as if it were precious. I'll call you soon, he promised. As they walked back toward the reception, Sarah felt as if her entire world had shifted on its axis. She had come to Camp Pendleton expecting to celebrate her friend's wedding and perhaps enjoy a pleasant evening. Instead, she had found a connection to her father's legacy that she never could have imagined. More than that, she had met a man who seemed to understand the depth of her loss, because he carried his own burden of grief and gratitude. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of photographs, toasts, and dancing. Sarah tried to focus on Jessica's happiness, but she found her eyes constantly seeking out Marcus across the crowded reception hall. Each time their gazes met, she felt a jolt of recognition that went far deeper than simple attraction. When it was time for her to leave, Sarah said her goodbyes to Jessica and David, promising to call soon to hear all about their honeymoon plans. As she walked toward the parking lot, she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Marcus approaching. I wanted to walk you to your car, he said simply. They walked in comfortable silence through the base, both lost in thought about the evening's revelations. When they reached Sarah's car, she turned to face him one final time. Thank you for telling me about my father, she said sincerely. It means more to me than you could possibly know. Thank you for listening, Marcus replied, and for helping me understand that fulfilling my promise to your father was exactly what I needed to finally forgive myself. As Sarah drove back toward Los Angeles, she found herself thinking not just about the past, but about the future. Meeting Marcus Rodriguez had changed something fundamental in her understanding of her father's death and her own identity as his daughter. She had no idea where this unexpected connection might lead, but for the first time in years, she felt genuinely hopeful about what lay ahead. 3 days after the wedding, Sarah sat in her Los Angeles apartment staring at her phone. Marcus had called twice since Saturday night, leaving thoughtful voicemails that she had listened to multiple times but hadn't yet returned. She wanted to talk to him desperately, but she was also afraid of what might develop between them. The connection they had discovered was so profound and emotionally charged that it felt almost dangerous. Her apartment, normally a sanctuary filled with her artwork and design projects, felt different now. Everything reminded her of her father in ways it never had before. The framed photo of them at her high school graduation sat on her bookshelf, and now when she looked at it, she saw not just her dad in his dress uniform, but the man who had saved 8 Marines' lives just weeks before that picture was taken. Sarah picked up her phone and finally dialed Marcus's number. He answered on the second ring. Sarah? His voice was warm and slightly uncertain. Hi, Marcus. I'm sorry I haven't called back sooner. I've been processing everything we talked about Saturday night. I completely understand. It was overwhelming for both of us. How are you feeling about it all? Sarah curled up in her favorite armchair, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. Confused, honestly, but also grateful. Learning about what my father did and meeting you, it's changed something fundamental for me. Changed how? For 5 years, I've been angry at the military for taking my father away from me. I understood intellectually that he died serving his country, But emotionally, I felt like the Corps had stolen him from his family. Learning that his death directly saved 8 men has shifted that anger into something else, something that feels more like pride. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Your father would be honored to know that his sacrifice helped you find peace with his service. Marcus, can I ask you something personal? Of course. When you look at me, do you see me, or do you see him? The question hung in the air between them, addressing the concern that had been keeping Sarah awake for 3 nights. She was attracted to Marcus, powerfully so, but she needed to know if his interest in her was genuine or if she was simply a living connection to the man who had saved his life. When I first saw your tattoo and realized who you were, I'll admit that I saw Bobby, Marcus replied honestly. The shock of recognition was so overwhelming that for a moment you were just his daughter. But as we talked, as I got to know you, that changed completely. You're not your father, Sarah. You're your own person, with your own strength, your own intelligence, your own beauty. What I feel for you has nothing to do with guilt or obligation to his memory. What do you feel for me? Sarah asked quietly. Marcus paused, and she could hear him choosing his words carefully. I feel like I've been waiting my entire life to meet you, and I had no idea I was waiting. I feel like the universe conspired to bring us together in the most unlikely way possible. And I feel terrified that you might decide this connection is too complicated to pursue. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the truth of his words resonate in her chest. I'm terrified too, but I'm also more drawn to you than I've been to anyone in my entire life. Then maybe we can be terrified together, Marcus suggested gently. Maybe we can take this slowly and see where it leads us. That conversation was the beginning of something extraordinary. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Marcus talked for hours every evening, sharing stories about their lives, their dreams, and their experiences. Sarah learned that Marcus had grown up in a military family, following his father and grandfather into the Marines. He had initially planned to serve for only 4 years, but her father's sacrifice had given him a sense of purpose that kept him in uniform. Marcus discovered that Sarah's artistic talents extended far beyond graphic design. She painted in her spare time, creating beautiful landscapes and portraits that captured emotions with stunning clarity. He was particularly moved by a series she had created about military families, including one painting of a woman in a wedding dress standing at a window, looking out at the ocean while waiting for her Marine husband to return home. You understand the sacrifice that families make, he told her one evening, as they walked along Santa Monica Beach. Most civilians don't grasp the emotional toll that deployment takes on the people left behind. Growing up military, you learn to live with constant uncertainty, Sarah replied. You learn to be proud and terrified at the same time. Their first official date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Los Angeles. Sarah had driven down from her apartment, and Marcus had made the hour-long trip up from Camp Pendleton. They were both nervous, aware that they were crossing a line from deep friendship into something more romantic. Marcus looked incredibly handsome in civilian clothes, his dark hair slightly tousled, and his green eyes bright with anticipation. Sarah had chosen a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and she had deliberately selected something that would completely cover her tattoo. She wanted this evening to be about them as individuals, not about the shared history that had brought them together. You look beautiful, Marcus said as he stood to greet her at their table. You look pretty good yourself, Sarah replied, feeling suddenly shy. It's strange seeing you out of uniform. Good strange or bad strange? Definitely good strange. You look more relaxed. They talked easily throughout dinner, discussing everything from books and movies to travel dreams and career aspirations. Marcus shared his plans to attend graduate school after his current tour ended, hoping to study international relations and eventually work in diplomatic security. Sarah talked about her goal of starting her own design firm and maybe teaching art classes to military children. "You want to work with military families?" Marcus asked, clearly intrigued. "I think I understand them in a way that other people might not," Sarah explained. "The uncertainty, the pride, the fear, the constant moves. Art can be a way for children to process emotions they don't have words for yet." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become." Instead of feeling uncomfortable with the reference to her father, Sarah felt a warm sense of rightness. Marcus wasn't comparing her to her father or trying to honor her father through her. He was simply acknowledging that her father's values lived on in her choices and dreams. After dinner, they walked along the beach, talking and laughing as waves lapped at the shore. When Marcus kissed her for the first time, standing under a streetlight with the ocean breeze stirring her hair, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Their relationship developed steadily over the following months. Sarah made the drive to Camp Pendleton most weekends, and Marcus came to Los Angeles whenever his duty schedule allowed. They explored Southern California together, hiking in the mountains, visiting art museums, and discovering small towns along the coast. Sarah gradually became part of Marcus's military community, attending unit social events and meeting the other officers and their families. She was initially nervous about fitting in, but she found that her military background helped her connect with the other military spouses, who understood the unique challenges of loving someone in uniform. Marcus, in turn, embraced Sarah's creative world. He attended art gallery openings with her, met her artist friends, and even posed for a portrait that she painted as a surprise for his birthday. He proved to have a good eye for visual composition and often offered helpful feedback on her work. 6 months after they met, Marcus told Sarah about the annual gathering to honor her father's memory. Bobby's Day was approaching, and he wanted her to consider meeting the other Marines her father had saved. "Are you sure they would want to meet me?" Sarah asked. "It might be strange for them." "I've already talked to them," Marcus assured her. "They've been hoping for the chance to meet you for years. They want to share their memories of your father and tell you how his sacrifice shaped their lives." The gathering took place at a small restaurant in San Diego, chosen because it was roughly equidistant from where the different Marines lived. Sarah was nervous as they walked into the private dining room Marcus had reserved, but her anxiety melted away the moment she saw the 8 men who stood to greet her. They ranged in age from their late 20s to mid-30s, and their civilian appearances varied widely. But they all shared something indefinable, a sense of purpose and gratitude that was immediately apparent. When Marcus introduced her, every man stood at attention out of respect. "Gentlemen, this is Sarah Mitchell, Sergeant Major Bobby Mitchell's daughter." The next 3 hours were among the most meaningful of Sarah's life. Each Marine shared his memories of her father, painting a picture of a man who was respected and beloved by everyone he served with. They told stories that made her laugh and others that brought tears to her eyes. Most importantly, they each explained how her father's sacrifice had motivated them to live lives of purpose and service. David Chen, the youngest of the group, had used his GI benefits to become a teacher in an inner-city school. "Your father believed that every person deserved a chance to succeed," he explained. "I try to give that same chance to my students." Robert Torres had started a non-profit organization that provided job training for veterans transitioning to civilian life. "Sergeant Major Mitchell taught me that Marines take care of each other," he said. "That didn't end when we left the Corps." Each story reinforced Sarah's understanding that her father's death had created ripple effects of good in the world. These men had built meaningful lives, raised families, and contributed to their communities specifically because they had been given a second chance through her father's sacrifice. As the evening wound down, the eldest of the group, A man named James Wilson, who was now a firefighter, stood to address Sarah directly. "Miss Mitchell, your father saved our lives in Afghanistan, but he did more than that. He showed us what it meant to put others before yourself, to lead by example, and to face impossible odds with courage and dignity. Every day we live is a gift from him, and we've tried to honor that gift by being the kind of men he would be proud to have served with." Sarah was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the depth of love and respect these men felt for her father. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, despite her tears. "Thank you for honoring his memory," she said. "Thank you for living lives that justify his sacrifice. And thank you for helping me understand that his death wasn't meaningless. It was the culmination of a life dedicated to service and sacrifice." As they left the restaurant, Marcus put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "How do you feel?" "Complete," she replied without hesitation. "For the first time since he died, I feel complete." A year after they met, Marcus proposed to Sarah on the same terrace where they had first discovered their connection. He had planned every detail carefully, arranging for Jessica and David to be present as witnesses, and timing the proposal to occur just as the sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, as he dropped to one knee, "you came into my life as the answer to a promise I made to your father, but you stayed because you're the love of my life. Will you marry me?" Sarah's answer was immediate and unequivocal. Yes. Their wedding took place the following spring at the same chapel where Jessica and David had been married. Sarah wore her mother's wedding dress, which had been her father's favorite, and Marcus wore his dress blue uniform. The ceremony was attended by Marines from Marcus's unit, Sarah's artist friends, and most importantly, the 8 Marines whose lives her father had saved. As they exchanged vows, Sarah felt her father's presence powerfully. She knew he would approve of the man she was marrying and the love they shared. Marcus had entered her life through tragedy, but he had stayed because of joy, compatibility, and a deep mutual respect that had nothing to do with their shared connection to her father's memory. When the chaplain pronounced them husband and wife, the entire chapel erupted in cheers. As they kissed to seal their union, Sarah felt like she was not just beginning a new chapter of her life, but honoring the legacy of the man who had raised her to be strong, compassionate, and brave. At the reception, James Wilson stood to offer a toast that captured the profound journey that had brought them all together. To Sergeant Major Bobby Mitchell, whose sacrifice gave 8 Marines a second chance at life. To Marcus and Sarah Rodriguez, who have shown us that love can grow from the seeds of loss, and that the best way to honor our fallen is to live fully and love deeply. And to the truth that some bonds are forged in the crucible of service and sacrifice, creating connections that last forever. As the guests raised their glasses, Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who had become her chosen family. Her father's sacrifice had created a legacy that extended far beyond his death, touching lives and creating connections that would endure for generations. Later that evening, as she and Marcus danced to their first song as husband and wife, Sarah touched the spot on her shoulder blade where her tattoo rested beneath her wedding dress. The eagle, the coordinates, and the phrase "Semper Fi until we meet again" would always be there, a permanent reminder of the father who had shaped her life through his love and his sacrifice. But now those words held a new meaning. She was no longer simply waiting to be reunited with her father in some distant future. She was living the life he would have wanted for her, surrounded by love and purpose, married to a man who embodied the same values of honor, courage, and commitment that had defined her father's life. Her tattoo had brought Marcus into her life, but their love would carry them into the future, creating new stories of service and sacrifice that would honor her father's memory while building something entirely their own.